So first, we're going to go, this is about the creative future. We're actually going to go to the creative past. And I wondered, Tim, if you would talk a little bit about your first inkling that you might be a designer, which I hear is that you played a lot with Legos. And not just like some people play with Legos. You built actually functional things that were needed in the household with Legos.
Yeah, it's become a bit of a cliche, hasn't it, that all designers started off by playing with their... I'm English, so it's Lego in my world, not Legos. I had big arguments with my publisher about it. They wouldn't let me. And then I was sat with the CEO of Lego a couple of months ago, and I said, "It is right. It's Lego, not Legos." He said, "Yes, they hate the term Legos."
Oh, all right, Americans,
just so you know,
you heard it here first.
If you want to please the Lego people, call it Lego, not Legos. Anyhow, but yes, I was obsessive about Lego as a kid, but I grew up in England in the 1970s, which, if you think Britain is dysfunctional now, it was even more dysfunctional then. It's hard to remember, but it was even more dysfunctional. And we had years and years of power strikes and blackouts, and on a regular basis, my mother would have to try and cook our evening meal with no light. And so I built a huge flashlight out of all of the Lego and batteries and things that I could find, and so that she could cook my dinner. That was the first product that I ever remember building. I think I was about 8 or something at the time.
That's amazing. And then, we're fast forwarding a little bit here, but you went to school, and we actually dug up your very first article on design.
So I heard.
You were a second-year student at Newcastle Polytechnic. Can we pull that up? I think I can do it myself here.
There we go.
This is 1983, Tim Brown. No little glasses. And one of the things...
A little bit slimmer then than I am now.
Well, you look great in both ways. So you wrote, a great proficiency in a certain skill, such as rendering or model making, has allowed a mediocre solution to seduce those for whom it was produced. Essentially saying, don't settle for mediocre solutions, which I feel like is actually central to your book, Change by Design, right?
Yep.
So when you hear that, how does it make you feel? Do you think like, I've always been like thinking and writing about the same thing? Or does this feel like vastly different?
When I found this article, and I'd totally forgotten that I'd written it, it was actually while I was writing my book, so it's about 10 years ago now, and I read it again, and after I got over how incredibly poorly written it was, and pompous it was.
I think you were trying to be taken seriously.
I was.
Young,
no, totally. And I was a designer who didn't know how to write.
We've all been there, right? Yes.
But the first thing I thought was, boy, have I not actually had a new idea in 30 years? Because everything I'm thinking now, I was thinking then at the age of 20 or 19 or whatever it was. And then on a little bit more reflection, I realized actually it was the start of a journey that has been my whole career, where I've really simply asked the same question.
Yeah.
The answer has continued to evolve, but the question was, what's next for design?
Yeah.
And I felt at the time, and I was hugely influenced by people like Victor Papanek, who wrote this wonderful book in the late 70s called Design for the Real World, which was challenging designers to take the world seriously and actually work on problems that mattered, rather than the problems that were just put in front of us. And I was strongly impacted by that book, and was simply asking that same question. I was like, well, what are the problems that matter, and how might we approach them? And that's the thing that's provide energy for me throughout my whole design career.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an instructive example of the creative life does have that through line that you can look at your childhood art or your childhood sketchbooks and see, oh, even then I had these instincts. And so how do you kind of protect the instinct but ask it in new ways all the time and in all the different contexts?
You do have to do a lot of editing out of other things, of course. But yes, yeah, I think it's true. I think it's true. I mean, design for me it did feel like destiny, I have to say. I mean, and it wasn't in my world. I mean, I didn't come from a design. My parents don't come from a design background. My father was a photographer, so he definitely had a creative piece to him. But design just felt like destiny. And once I discovered it, Although it took me a while
Yeah.
to figure out that design even existed.
Where to plug in.
But yeah.
Well, you've actually made it far easier for other people to discover design, right? Part of what's so interesting about your book, Change by Design, which came out 10 years ago, so there's this new edition, which Tim has updated with, contemporary context and new examples, new case studies.
And try to explain the embarrassing examples that didn't quite work out how I hoped they would.
Right, exactly. You've popularized design in a big way. IDEO, as a organizational force, has popularized design so much. Actually, I wanted to ask in the audience, how many of you use design? Well, first this, how many of you define yourselves as designers? Raise your hand.
Everybody.
Okay, so a lot of you. How many of you use design thinking in your work but do not define yourself as a designer? Okay, very interesting. I ask because this is part of what has happened with your work as a thought leader and also with IDEO more generally is over the last decade, this huge popularization of people understanding design, people using design thinking. What are the wins and kind of warnings of that? Because I know of course that was part of what you were trying to do, but also there's always the fear that design gets watered down and people use it in ways that...
No, it's a delicate balancing act whenever you try and open up any topic or any act, any practice to a wider audience. Popularizing anything has both positive and negative effects. But I've always believed that design as an act, as a practice of purposeful creative problem solving, is just a lot broader than the piece of it that's practiced by those of us who call ourselves professional designers, or at least had the potential to be. Design gets less exposure than it deserves, but still gets quite a lot of exposure. The professional piece of design, more so than it used to, partly because of the transformation of our world digitally. There is just so much more design going on today than there ever has been in the past. But the practice of creative problem solving through the thing that we as designers do all the time is just not well understood by those that don't have the good fortune to end up in our line of work. And that felt, again, going back to people like Victor Papanek, who was pointing out problems that could only be solved in circumstances where people who were not professional designers were likely to be working, right? In parts of the world where there aren't designers, or in parts of society where there aren't designers. And so unless we popularize design methods and design approaches, and we use the convenient term design thinking, even though I think that's also got some downsides to it. But anyhow, unless we do that, there's no chance that those challenges are going to be taken up. There simply are not enough professional designers on the planet to be able to tackle all the problems that could be productively tackled by taking a design approach. So I just felt that it's a non-zero sum opportunity, right? It's not like we're trying to fight over slices of a pie that's the same size. It's about making making the potential so much greater. So I felt just anything we could do to achieve that would be worthwhile. Of course, the downsides are obvious to any practicing designer, which we all know that it takes years and years of practice to become truly deep and good at crafting design solutions that are truly as multifaceted as they need to be in terms of their form of creation, their manufacturer, if you come from my world of product design, however you want to talk about it, their form of production, as well as how they face the world and how they travel through the world, and that is not something that can be taught in a half-day workshop, and not something that can be practiced after only having tried it out once or twice. And so the idea of mastery, which is so crucial to successful design, is something that can get glossed over very easily when you're popularizing something. And that's true of any topic that you try to popularize.
Right.
And so we try and talk about it a little bit in the update of the book, that there's a lot of potential for increasing our mastery as well as increasing the scope and scale of design.
Talk more about that, because I was really intrigued by your use of the word mastery. And, on the one hand, we have people who think I bought a stack of Post-it notes, I'm doing design, right? So like a real misconstruing of like what design is.
Yes, we do know that 3M Corporation did quite well.
Yes. But on this side of the spectrum, the mastery side, how do you recognize mastery? Like how do you, I know it's a hard thing to pin down, but can you say a little bit more about it?
There are important and different aspects to it. There's one piece of mastery that I think is tremendously important, which is one that David Kelly, my colleague and founder of IDEO, talks about when he talks about creative confidence, which is that true masters of design have confidence in their ability to create solutions that are of much greater scope and scale. Even though they have no idea what that solution is going to be when they start. Right? So that confidence to leap into the unknown is a form of mastery. Right? So there's a sort of mindset piece to it. There are clearly the mastery of the skills of the making of one's design solutions, whether that's crafting something digital, or crafting something physical, or crafting a great story, or whatever it might be. That ability to do that to a level of resolution and imagination comes with practice, right? It comes with having reference points about what you've done before and what other people have done before, knowing what good looks like.
Right.
It takes a long time to know what good looks like. It's very easy to be satisfied with an idea simply because you had the idea.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what many kind of neophytes in the creative world struggle with, right? They think, I've had an idea, it must be wonderful. Well, no, it's not wonderful because 1,000 other people have had that idea before you just haven't noticed yet.
Yeah.
So that knowing what good looks like, I think, is important. I think there are new forms of mastery that are emerging that even for those of us who are well practiced as designers are having to struggle with. I was just having a conversation upstairs with some folks about the shift in the notion in the practices of design that happened post software, which is the idea that design is now no longer ever finished. In the pre-software world of design, design had this. You set design at the beginning, and then it was fixed, right? Because you couldn't change it. Couldn't change a physical product. You couldn't change a piece of print. It was done. So. But now everything we designed, almost everything we design, continues to evolve. And so mastering that is no small challenge. Understanding how to continue, how something continues to evolve. I actually don't think we understand how to do that well yet.
Right.
So
mastery used to be about a finite moment where you could say, okay, that was mastery or not.
Right.
Now it's managing.
Exactly. And then complexity is another one. We're being asked to take on design problems which are many, many times more complex than the things that we were asked to take on just a few decades ago.
Right.
And so understanding the interrelationships between different touch points in an experience or in a complex system where there are many, many different stakeholders and many, many different users, and it just goes on and on and on. And that is something that's very hard for us to master.
It's interesting because when you were first talking about mastery, I was thinking, it was sort of logical that older designers, people who've done a lot of projects and been exposed to a lot of ideas, would have more of a chance of having some mastery. But then as you continue talking, then the latter part is like, if you grew up in this moment, if you're young and you've been used to these wicked problems and you've been used to the way in which there is no finite moment, you might actually be closer to mastery. How do you think about age?
No, I think it's a real challenge. I was talking about this to my friend Neri Oxman at MIT a year or so ago, and I was asking, well, how? Because she's doing all this wonderful work with software and algorithms in the physical world, and so as a product designer, I was like, well, how do you do this? How do you move backwards and forwards between the world and software and hardware? And she doesn't, because she designs in code. So she's a physical designer of materials that's designing in code. I have no conception of how to do that, right? Absolutely none. She's an embarrassingly large number of years younger than me, but yes, for her it's native. And I think that is a difficult challenge. There will be forms of design which will be fit for the future that many of us who are existing practicing designers today might never master, or at least will have to work very much harder to master because we didn't grow up with it intuitively and natively.
But also speaks to one of your main points in this update, which is that design, like the future of design, the creative future, is not about individual designers, it's about teams, right? So the more intergenerational teams, the more diversity we have on teams from different backgrounds, like the more apt we are to tackle those problems.
Yeah, I mean, this is an article of faith for me that I found that time and time again, as I think about the design of anything and everything, that almost always the most useful examples are found in biology, right? They're found in the natural world, and when I think about fit ecosystems, they're always the ones that are the most diverse,
right?
Whether it's a rainforest in the Amazon or a healthy freshwater lake in wherever, somewhere in the world. These things are rich, diverse ecosystems, and they evolve.
And deeply collaborative.
And well, in a certain sort of way. They exchange a lot of information.
Yeah.
Which, if you think of collaboration about the as being about the exchange of information, then yes. And so I think as probably one of the biggest disadvantages that the practice of design has today is it's actually one of the less diverse kind of human societal practices. That it grew up out of a tradition that was largely Western European, largely based on people with enough wealth to be able to afford to go to art school and design school. There were a whole bunch of disadvantages that design started with that it's now having to combat. And fortunately, we're beginning to see that happen. But
and Kat's going to speak too. So we're in good hands,
exactly.
people. So you wrote, more good ideas die because they fail to navigate the treacherous waters of the organization where they originate than because the market rejects them. And I was so struck by that because I know there are a lot of designers in the audience who are working within organizations, and we all think it's all about having the great idea, but actually it's the people, right? It's like getting the great ideas through the maze and brokenness and beauty of humans that is the challenge. So do you have advice for the folks here about how to get good ideas through the maze of organization?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways design is politics and politics is design. Maybe the politicians would claim everything's politics, I suppose, but the truth is that so much of design is about the relationships with people. Obviously, the source of design is about our relationships between people and technology and people in the world. But the success of our design relies on our understanding of people and of the social organizations that they're part of.
Right.
And a pal of mine, Roger Martin, who's a business strategist who's written a lot about design, he and I wrote a little article in Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago on this idea. We called it intervention design. I think it was a bad title, but it was this idea that you can design the interventions that make it more likely that your ideas will succeed. You can think of that as part of the set of creative problems that you're trying to solve for,
like the superstructure,
as well as the application or the product or the service or whatever it is that you might be designing for the end user, that you actually have to design for the organization that is responsible, or that is the vehicle for that thing that you're designing. And whether you're in a startup or whether you're in a large corporation or in a nonprofit, there is always an organization that is the vehicle for everything we create. And you can design for that. And there are some things we do naturally as designers which turn out to be useful pieces of intervention design. One of them is we make stuff, right? And it turns out organizations have a much easier time believing in something they can touch and feel and see than they do in things that they're being asked to imagine in their heads. The advantage that we as designers have over the folks that put PowerPoint decks up on the wall or up on the screen is that we can make things real. So making things real as early as possible is one of the tools that, in my experience, helps you get ideas through organizations. But I think there are other things that we can. So one of the things that we've been studying at IDEO for a number of years now is the relationship between how purposeful an organization is and how good at design and innovation an organization is. And there's a high correlation between the two.
Yeah.
Right? So the more purposeful of an organization is, the more it knows why it exists beyond making money, the more likely you are to be able to create new ideas and have those ideas get into the world. In fact, we've got data that shows you're 2 or 3 times more likely to be able to get new ideas out into the world successfully. And I think that it's fairly obvious why that is the case, because if an organization only can judge things based on whether or not it can make money, it is almost always going to be highly incremental in the way it thinks. But if it's got some purpose in the world, if it's trying to achieve something meaningful, then ideas have a place to take hold. They have a place to take flight, right?
Yeah.
And they live longer. And the thing about ideas, new ideas, is that they're like, I don't know what the right word for it is, but they're like fragile new species. They have to live for a while before they start to flourish and show their potential. And if they get killed because, we don't know how to make money out of that, they get killed right at the beginning, then they never have a chance to flourish.
Well, this is interesting because one of the things Will pointed out in his introduction was that the number one fear around here is financial constraints and how that constrains creativity and constraints design. For folks who aren't in an IDEO-like setting, but maybe working with more financial constraints, do you have advice for them on how to?
Well, I think financial constraints are totally healthy and fine and inevitable. There's 2 kinds of financial constraint. Obviously, there's the resource constraint, the financial resource constraint, which do you actually have enough resources to go do something new and do something interesting? We have to know how to deal with that. And then there's but the constraint that I think I'm talking about here is if you like, the financial impact constraint, right? Is this idea going to make money for us? I think we have to be extremely adept at arguing not just the merits of the idea because it's going to make users happy or they're going to like it more, but we have to get imaginative about how our new ideas actually drive the business models of the organizations that we work with, and we have to be able to engage, which is why I think I've certainly found it tremendously helpful in my career as I started to more closely work with truly creative business people who were willing to innovate around the business model, and not just innovate around the stuff that the business model creates.
Right.
And that's new language. It's a new medium, if you like, for design. But I found that the more kind of educated I've gotten about how business models work, the more willing I am to be able to challenge the status quo. And it's just the same as you do when you think about the relationship between design and engineering. Right? I mean, I grew up in the physical world, and when I was designing products, I knew.
I love how you say that. Me too.
Yeah, I guess we all grew up in the physical world. But
I know how you're thinking of it, but I love that.
I mean, I don't have the same intuition about digital things as I have
Right.
about physical. I've gotten better, but I didn't.
That.
So all my arguments were with manufacturing engineers, right,
Yeah.
who would tell me when I designed a new computer or a new TV or whatever it was, you can't make that.
Yeah.
You can't make that, right? So your idea is useless because you can't make it. And the only solution to that was to be as good an engineer as they were, and be able to say, actually, you can make that, and this is how you make it, and this is how you design the injection molding tools to make it. And when presented with a viable argument, they would at least give you long enough to prove that your idea was okay. And I think we have to be able to do the same thing on the business side.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about ethics a little bit, because I know you've been deeply involved in thinking about the ethical life of designers and the ethical mandate for design as a whole. You wrote, "Design thinking is not the, quote, invisible hand, it is intentional." We live in this moment where designers are in part being held accountable for how democracy is unfolding in a new way. We had, I don't know if people saw that Chris Hughes wrote a piece this morning out in the Times calling for the breakup of Facebook. Design is like an understory in all of this. And you've been working with a lot of other designers thinking about what is our ethical mandate? What is our Hippocratic oath for design? Can you talk about how you're thinking about that these days?
Yeah. Well, one thing it's definitely not, which is not, it's not the Hippocratic oath as we think about it in the medical world, because I think if we made the oath to first do no harm as designers, we would likely never do anything new. And I think that would be unfortunate. I think we need systems to ensure that we don't do too much harm, or we don't we don't harm intentionally.
Yeah.
But I worry about a kind of an automatic reaction to the kind of ethical dilemmas that we have today with technology to be we're not going to take any risks.
Right.
And so I would rather see us make the oath to being extremely adept learners, right? And not disengage, right? So I remember, it's not that long ago, I'm sure many of this room remember when so much of the design that we saw coming out from organizations, like Facebook, was so optimistic, right?
Yeah.
We thought, oh, this is wonderful. We're connecting people in new ways. We're doing all these and then sort of things went to the dark side a little bit for a whole bunch of reasons which we're beginning to understand. But I would hate for designers to feel like we can't ever engage with something that's unknown because we're worried about what the outcomes might be. I think we have to engage with a responsibility to act when we find out something new.
Right.
So we have to engage with the commitment to stay involved in the ever-changing nature of what the design problem is. With particularly,
it circles back to your point about mastery.
yeah,
right?
and particularly with these new systems as they're emerging. We're at this. I mean, there's a reason why I think this is the best time to be alive as a designer that there's been for about 150 years. The last best time was in the late 1800s when industrialization was first getting going, right? When all of this new possibility, every system on the planet was changing, right? And it was just a wonderful moment to be a designer. The only trouble was, back then there were no professional designers. There were architects, and there was nobody else, right? And that was the moment when design as a kind of a professional practice first emerged, as a response to the downsides of industrialization. So here we are, 150 years later, 130 years later, at another moment that's even bigger, right? Where almost every system that the world relies on is getting transformed because of the shift to software and the shift to AI and intelligence and all these other technologies that we have. And so the opportunity and the responsibility to be engaged in these transformations is mind-blowing. And so that's why I think it's an incredibly good time to be a designer. But we do have to lose, I think, funny enough, one of the habits or mindsets that we developed in the industrial age as designers, which was this sort of fire and forget idea about design, that we would finish our design and launch it into the world, and then after that it was other people's problem. It was the marketing people's problem, or it was the end user's problem, or whatever. We did our bit.
Yeah.
We finished the design. We took the photograph of the beautiful object or the beautiful piece of print or whatever it was, and we were done. We put it in our book or in our portfolio, and we moved on to the next project. That mindset is destructive now because these things don't stay in the same state that we designed them in. As I just said, they continue to evolve. So that mindset has to shift. We have to find new ways of staying engaged with things over much longer periods of time, with these systems over longer periods of time. But they're incredibly exciting and interesting problems.
Yeah, true. Well, you heard it here first. Best time alive to be a designer. That's good news. This is all the time we have. Thank you, Tim, so much for this conversation.
Thanks very much. Thank you.